The sound of bustling traffic echoed through the streets of Maitama, Abuja's elite district, as Tunde Adeyemi stepped out of a keke napep near his office. He paused to straighten his well-worn suit jacket, which clung awkwardly to his lean frame. The jacket was a relic from his early days of law school, but he wore it with quiet pride. It was a reminder of how far he had come. Tunde adjusted his tie and gazed up at the towering glass building of Olumide and Associates. It stood tall among other corporate giants, a testament to the firm's reputation as one of the most prestigious law practices in Nigeria. Lawyers who worked there often joked that securing a job at Olumide and Associates was harder than becoming a SAN, senior advocate of Nigeria. At just 30 years old, Tunde had managed to beat the odds. Raised in Ilorin by a widowed mother who sold Gary at the market, he knew what it meant to struggle. From the day he decided to study law, he had carried the weight of his family's expectations. His father had passed away when Tunde was just 12, leaving his mother to raise him and his 2 younger siblings on her own. That morning, Tunde walked into the firm's sleek reception area, where the smell of freshly brewed coffee lingered. He exchanged pleasantries with the receptionist, Titi, who always greeted him with a warm smile. She had once confided in him that she admired his humility. Many of the young lawyers at the firm treated support staff like they were invisible, but Tunde always made an effort to ask about her family. As he made his way to his desk, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his mother. "Tunde, remember to eat something today. God bless you, my son." Her messages were a daily ritual that made him smile, no matter how stressful his workload became. He texted back a quick, "I will, Mama," before setting his phone aside. Tunde's office was modest compared to the senior associates, but he didn't mind. He had a small window overlooking the city and a bookshelf crammed with legal textbooks, most of which he had borrowed from his mentor during his days at the University of Ilorin. "Good morning, superstar." Tunde looked up to see Kemi Omotosho, his closest friend at the firm. Kemi, a petite woman with a sharp wit and a love for Amala, always knew how to brighten his day. She leaned against the doorway, holding 2 steaming cups of tea. "Good morning, Kemi," he replied, taking the cup she offered. "Big day today?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Tunde nodded. "Chief Kalapo's case? I'm supposed to meet him this afternoon to discuss strategy." "Ah, Chief Kalapo?" Kemi said with a playful smirk. "The man who has half of Abuja in his pocket? Be careful with that one, Tunde." "I will," he said with a laugh. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Bola Olorunfemi, one of the firm's most charismatic lawyers. Bola was everything Tunde was not: confident, flashy, and effortlessly charming. His designer suits and imported cologne were the talk of the office, and he always seemed to know the right people. "Tunde, my guy," Bola called out, striding toward them with the swagger of a man who owned the room. "Bola," Tunde greeted, extending a hand. "I hear you're handling Chief Kalapo's case," Bola said, his smile wide but his eyes calculating. "That's big, my brother. If you play your cards right, you'll be a senior associate in no time." "Thanks," Tunde replied cautiously. "Anyway, let me know if you need any pointers," Bola added, clapping him on the shoulder before walking off. As Bola disappeared down the hallway, Kemi leaned closer to Tunde. "Be careful around him," she warned. Tunde frowned. "Why do you say that?" Kemi hesitated, as if searching for the right words. "Let's just say Bola is ambitious, and sometimes ambition can blind people to what's right." Tunde shrugged off her comment, unwilling to let paranoia creep into his mind. Bola had always been friendly to him, even offering advice when he first joined the firm. Later that evening, the firm hosted a dinner party at a luxury hotel in Wus. The event was a celebration of their recent wins, and everyone was dressed to impress. Tunde arrived late, his simple navy blue suit paling in comparison to Bola's shiny, tailored ensemble. As the night wore on, Tunde found himself seated next to Bola, who regaled the table with stories of his courtroom triumphs. Tunde couldn't help but admire Bola's confidence and eloquence. "You know, Tunde," Bola said, turning to him, "you remind me of myself when I first started here. Young, hungry, ready to conquer the world." Tunde chuckled. "Thanks, Bola. I'm just trying to do my best." "That's the spirit," Bola said, raising his glass. "To Tunde, the future of Olumide and Associates." The toast drew applause from their colleagues, and Tunde felt a rush of pride. But as he glanced at Bola, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something deeper behind his colleague's smile. The night ended with Tunde walking home along the quiet streets of Garki. The city lights twinkled above him, and he thought about his journey so far. He had worked tirelessly to get where he was, but he knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The legal world in Abuja was competitive, and he would need to stay focused if he wanted to succeed. As he entered his small apartment and collapsed onto his bed, his mother's words echoed in his mind. "Remember who you are, Tunde. Never let anyone make you forget your values." He closed his eyes, determined to rise above the challenges ahead, unaware of the storm brewing within the walls of Olamide and Associates. Back to the first time Bola and Tunde truly connected was over a shared plate of jollof rice in the firm's break room. It was a busy afternoon, and Tunde had been too engrossed in drafting a brief to notice the time. By the time he realized he hadn't eaten, his head was pounding, and his stomach was growling. "Ah, my guy, you look like someone who needs food," Bola said as he walked into the break room with a large takeaway pack. He opened it to reveal steaming jollof rice with a side of fried plantains and grilled chicken. Tunde chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You have no idea. I've been buried in work all day." Bola laughed and pulled up a chair. "Sit down. Let's share this. Hunger is not good for a sharp mind." That simple act of kindness broke the ice between them. Over lunch, they talked about everything: work, their families, and their dreams. Tunde discovered that Bola had grown up in Lagos and attended one of the top private universities in the country. Unlike Tunde, who had clawed his way up from humble beginnings, Bola came from a well-connected family. "But don't let the background fool you," Bola said with a grin. "My father always made it clear. Connections might get you in the door, but only hard work will keep you there." Tunde nodded. He admired Bola's candor and confidence. It was easy to see why so many people in the firm gravitated toward him. From that day, their friendship grew. Bola became a constant presence in Tunde's life, offering advice and sharing tips on how to navigate the cutthroat politics of the legal world. He showed Tunde how to polish his arguments for court and even introduced him to a few influential clients. "Your problem, Tunde, is that you're too modest," Bola said one evening as they worked late on a case. "You're brilliant, but you need to let people see it. Speak up more during meetings. Take the credit when it's due." Tunde took Bola's words to heart. Over time, he began to assert himself more in the firm. He spoke with greater confidence during strategy sessions, and his cases started to draw attention. Colleagues who once overlooked him began to take notice. "See?" Bola said one evening after a particularly successful presentation. "What did I tell you? You're a natural." Tunde smiled, grateful for Bola's support. He started to see Bola not just as a colleague, but as a mentor and a friend. But cracks began to appear in their friendship when the firm assigned them to collaborate on a high-profile case. It was a complicated land dispute involving a prominent Abuja businessman. The stakes were high, and the case attracted significant media attention. From the start, Tunde noticed that Bola seemed distracted. He missed meetings, delayed reviewing important documents, and often left Tunde to handle the bulk of the work. One afternoon, Tunde confronted him in the break room. "Bola, what's going on? You're not pulling your weight on this case." Bola looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. "Relax, Tunde. I've got everything under control. You worry too much." Tunde frowned. "This is a team effort, Bola. If something goes wrong, it's both our reputations on the line." "Nothing will go wrong," Bola said with a dismissive wave. "Trust me." Tunde wanted to believe him, but the nagging feeling in his gut wouldn't go away. Things came to a head during a critical court hearing. As Tunde presented their arguments, he noticed inconsistencies in the evidence Bola had prepared. The opposing counsel seized on the errors, undermining their credibility. After the hearing, Tunde cornered Bola in the parking lot. "What happened in there, Bola? That evidence was incomplete." Bola shrugged. "It's not a big deal. We'll recover in the next session." "Not a big deal?" Tunde's voice rose. "Do you realize how this makes us look? I trusted you to handle this." Bola's expression darkened. "Careful, Tunde. Don't forget who taught you how to survive in this firm." The words stung, but Tunde refused to back down. "I earned my place here, Bola. I didn't need anyone to carry me." Their argument marked the beginning of a rift in their friendship. Tunde started to distance himself, focusing on his work and double-checking everything Bola touched. He began to notice other things, subtle but telling signs. Documents missing from his desk, clients suddenly questioning his competence, and whispered rumors circulating through the office. One evening, as Tunde worked late, Kemi knocked on his door. She looked hesitant, her usual cheer replaced by concern. "Tunde, can I talk to you?" "Of course," he said, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated before speaking. "I don't know how to say this, but you need to be careful with Bola." Tunde sighed. "You've mentioned this before, Kemi. What is it you're not telling me?" She glanced around, as if worried someone might overhear. "I've seen him talking to some of your clients behind your back, and remember that brief you lost last month? I'm pretty sure he took it." Tunde's chest tightened. Why would he do that? Kemi's expression was pained. "Because he wants what you have. Bola isn't your friend, Tunde. He's using you." The realization hit Tunde like a punch to the gut. All the late nights, the shared meals, the advice, it had all been a facade. Bola had been setting him up, slowly chipping away at his reputation to clear a path for himself. That night, Tunde sat alone in his office, the weight of betrayal heavy on his shoulders. He thought about his mother's words, "Never let anyone make you forget your values." Bola might have betrayed him, but Tunde resolved that he wouldn't stoop to his level. He would fight back the right way, with integrity and determination. The next morning was eerily quiet as Tunde walked into the office. It was unusual for the hustle and bustle of a typical weekday to feel so subdued. But Tunde's mind wasn't on the silence. It was on the critical presentation he was scheduled to deliver later that day. Months of hard work had gone into this case, and he knew this was his chance to prove himself as one of the firm's rising stars. As he reached his desk, he noticed something odd. A file he had meticulously prepared the night before was missing. He distinctly remembered placing it on the corner of his desk before heading home. His heart sank. "Kemi," he called out to his assistant, who had just walked in with her morning coffee. "Did you move the Ajayi file?" Kemi shook her head. "No, I haven't touched anything on your desk." Tunde frowned, his mind racing. He started searching through the drawers and shelves, but the file was nowhere to be found. "Check the archives," Kemi suggested, her tone uneasy. Tunde nodded and headed to the records room. As he sifted through the shelves, dread settled in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't afford to lose this file, not with everything riding on today's presentation. When the search yielded nothing, Tunde returned to his desk, defeated. But something about the situation didn't sit right with him. It wasn't just carelessness. This felt deliberate. Later that morning, Tunde spotted Bola walking into the conference room with a confident stride. A chill ran down his spine. He couldn't explain why, but he felt compelled to follow. Standing just outside the door, Tunde overheard Bola speaking to one of the firm's senior partners. "I've got the Ajayi file ready," Bola said, his voice smooth. "I think my adjustments will really impress the client." Tunde froze. The Ajayi file? My file? His heart pounded as he pieced it together. Bola had taken the file, claimed it as his own, and was now presenting it to the firm's leadership. Tunde felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could Bola, someone he had trusted so much, betray him like this? He didn't confront Bola immediately. Instead, Tunde decided to gather proof. He needed more than suspicion to take on someone as cunning as Bola. That evening, Tunde stayed back at the office. Most of the staff had left, and the building was quiet, save for the distant hum of air conditioners. He waited until Bola stepped out, leaving his office door slightly ajar. Tunde slipped inside, his hands trembling as he searched through the desk drawers. At first, he found nothing unusual, just stacks of documents and a few personal items. But then, in a folder tucked at the back of the drawer, he found something that made his blood run cold. Inside were notes detailing several of Tunde's cases Bola had no official involvement in. There were annotations on weaknesses in the arguments, potential delays, and even strategies to undermine Tunde's credibility. It wasn't just the Ajayi file. Bola had been sabotaging him for months. Tunde stared at the evidence, his mind reeling. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time mistake. Bola had been plotting against him systematically, all while pretending to be his friend. As he left the office that night, Tunde felt a storm brewing inside him. The betrayal cut deep, but he knew he couldn't let Bola win. The next day, Tunde approached Kemi. He laid out everything he had found, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and determination. Kemi listened, her expression growing more serious with each word. "Tunde, you need to take this to Mr. Adekunle," she said, referring to the firm's managing partner. Tunde hesitated. "I don't have enough proof yet. Bola could twist this and make it look like I'm accusing him out of jealousy." "Then let's get proof," Kemi said firmly. Together, they devised a plan. Kemi would keep an eye on Bola's activities while Tunde worked to secure additional evidence. It was risky, but Tunde had no choice. Over the next few weeks, Tunde noticed more signs of Bola's sabotage. Emails meant for Tunde were intercepted, critical documents were misplaced, and clients started receiving incomplete information. One evening, as Tunde reviewed a particularly complicated case, he realized something alarming. A key document had been altered. Details that could sink their argument had been deliberately removed. Tunde cross-checked the original file on his computer and found the discrepancies. "It's him," Kemi said when Tunde showed her the evidence. "He's been manipulating everything." Armed with these findings, Tunde decided it was time to act. He scheduled a meeting with Mr. Adekunle and presented the evidence. In the meeting, Tunde laid out everything he had discovered. Mr. Adekunle listened intently, his expression grim. "This is serious, Tunde," he said after a long pause. "If what you're saying is true, Bola's actions could damage the firm's reputation." "I wouldn't bring this up if I wasn't sure," Tunde said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Mr. Adekunle nodded. "I'll need to verify this. But if Bola is guilty, he won't get away with it." Later that week, a firm-wide meeting was called. Tunde's heart raced as he walked into the conference room, where all the senior partners were seated. Bola was there too, his usual confident smirk firmly in place. "Tunde, you've brought some serious allegations against Bola," Mr. Adekunle began. "We've reviewed the evidence, and we believe the matter requires immediate attention." Tunde spoke calmly but firmly, recounting everything he had discovered. As he presented the evidence, Bola's smirk faded, replaced by a mask of feigned indignation. "These are baseless accusations," Bola said when it was his turn to speak. "Tunde is clearly trying to undermine me because he's threatened by my success." But the evidence was undeniable. Emails, altered documents, and even testimonies from other colleagues painted a clear picture of Bola's actions. By the end of the meeting, the senior partners had reached a decision. Bola was suspended, pending further investigation. As the meeting adjourned, Tunde felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The battle wasn't over, but he had taken the first step toward reclaiming his reputation. That evening, Tunde sat in his small apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal still stung, but he also felt a sense of clarity. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend." Tunde had learned this lesson the hard way, but it was a lesson he would never forget. Bola's betrayal had shaken him, but it hadn't broken him. Tunde resolved to move forward, not with bitterness, but with a renewed sense of purpose. He would continue to rise, not by tearing others down, but by staying true to himself. After the firm-wide meeting where Bola had been suspended pending investigation, the office buzzed with speculation. Some colleagues sympathized with Tunde, while others whispered doubts, their loyalty to Bola rooted in his charm and years of influence at the firm. For weeks, the tension lingered, but what gnawed at Tunde the most was the thought that Bola's suspension wasn't enough. Bola hadn't admitted his wrongdoing, and the possibility of him returning to the firm without facing full accountability was unbearable. One Friday afternoon, Tunde received an email from the firm's managing partner, Mr. Adekunle, inviting him to a private meeting in the main conference room. The email hinted at further discussions on the Bola situation. Tunde prepared himself mentally, running through the evidence and rehearsing responses to potential questions. When Tunde walked into the conference room, he wasn't surprised to see Bola seated at the far end of the table, his arms crossed, his eyes dark and unwavering. The room was filled with senior partners, their faces a mix of curiosity and expectation. "Tunde, Bola," Mr. Adekunle began, his tone measured, "we've reviewed the findings further, and it's clear we need to address this issue directly. Bola has requested the opportunity to respond fully to the accusations. Tunde sat down, his gaze steady. He knew this was going to be a battle, but he was ready. Bola leaned forward, his voice calm but with an undercurrent of defiance. I won't sit here and let my reputation be destroyed by baseless accusations. Tunde has always had a problem with my success. This is just his way of trying to pull me down. Tunde felt his chest tighten, but he kept his tone controlled. Bola, this isn't about jealousy or competition. It's about integrity. I didn't accuse you without proof. The altered documents, the missing files, the tampered emails, those aren't coincidences. Bola laughed dryly, shaking his head. And I suppose you think I single-handedly orchestrated all that? Maybe you're just not as organized as you think you are, Tunde. It's easy to blame others for your mistakes. The room grew quiet. The senior partners exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the heated exchange. Tunde took a deep breath. You know what hurts the most, Bola? I trusted you. I thought we were friends. You came into my life, acted like my biggest supporter, and all the while, you were plotting against me. Bola's expression faltered for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. This is business, Tunde. If you can't handle the competition, maybe you're in the wrong field. Tunde stood up, his voice rising. Competition? Is that what you call stealing my work and sabotaging my cases? This isn't competition, Bola. It's deceit. It's betrayal. At that moment, Kemi entered the room, carrying a laptop. She looked hesitant but determined. Mr. Adekunle, may I show something? The managing partner nodded, and Kemi connected the laptop to the projector. This is a recording from the office security cameras, she explained. It's from the night before the Ajayi file went missing. The video played, showing Bola entering Tunde's office late at night, flipping through documents, and eventually leaving with the file. The room fell silent as the evidence unfolded. Bola's face turned pale, his confident facade crumbling. That's not what it looks like, Bola stammered. I needed to review the case. I didn't mean. Tunde interrupted, his voice steady but filled with emotion. You didn't mean to what, Bola? You didn't mean to use my work to boost your profile? Or you didn't mean to get caught? The senior partners began murmuring among themselves, their expressions ranging from disbelief to disappointment. Mr. Adekunle raised a hand, silencing the room. Bola, this is undeniable. Your actions have not only jeopardized Tunde's work, but also the reputation of this firm, and effective from this minute, you are fired. Bola slumped in his chair, his defeat evident. For Tunde, the confrontation was bittersweet. Seeing Bola exposed brought a sense of relief, but it didn't erase the pain of betrayal. As the meeting concluded, Tunde felt a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a hint of vindication. Later that evening, as Tunde packed up his desk to head home, Bola approached him in the corridor. He looked nothing like the confident, manipulative man Tunde had once called a friend. Tunde, Bola began, his voice low. I don't know what to say. I made mistakes. I let my ambition get the better of me. Tunde studied him for a long moment. You didn't just make a mistake, Bola. You made a choice. A choice to betray someone who trusted you. I know, Bola admitted, his eyes downcast. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Tunde sighed, his anger still simmering but tempered by a sense of closure. I don't know if I can forgive you, Bola. But I hope you learn from this. Ambition is worthless if it costs you your integrity. Bola nodded, his shoulders sagging as he walked away. As Tunde stepped out into the cool Abuja evening, he felt a strange sense of peace. The confrontation had been difficult, but it had also taught him an important lesson. Not everyone who stands by you is truly on your side. 6 months later, on the trial day, the courtroom in the heart of Abuja's business district was packed. It was one of the firm's most high-profile cases in recent years, a dispute between two oil conglomerates over a multi-billion naira contract. For weeks, the media had been buzzing with speculation, adding a layer of pressure to what was already a career-defining moment for Tunde. He sat at the plaintiff's table, his suit pressed, his notes meticulously organized. His client, Mr. Lawal, a stern-faced but affable businessman, sat beside him. Across the room, at the defense table, sat Bola. Despite his suspension, he had managed to secure independent representation for the rival oil company, a move that surprised everyone at the firm. Tunde clenched his jaw as he glanced at Bola, who appeared calm, almost smug. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was personal. The trial opened with a flurry of activity. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Justice Okonkwo, set the tone immediately. "This court will tolerate no theatrics," she warned. "Present your case with clarity and respect for the law." Tunde stood, his voice steady as he began his opening statement. "Your Lordship, this case is about fairness and accountability. My client entered into a contract in good faith, only to find himself at the mercy of deceit and manipulation." He outlined the key points of his case, careful to balance logic with passion. As he spoke, he noticed some jurors nodding, their interest piqued. Bola, in turn, delivered his opening statement. He was as charismatic as ever, weaving a narrative that painted his client as the victim of miscommunication rather than malice. Tunde could see the jury's attention shift, their expressions unreadable. It was going to be a battle of wits, and Tunde knew he had to bring his best. Over the next several days, the courtroom became a stage for intense legal sparring. Tunde presented evidence with precision, calling expert witnesses and dissecting contracts line by line. He pointed out inconsistencies in the defense's claims, his arguments sharp and methodical. "Mr. Ajayi," Tunde asked one of the witnesses, a contract specialist, "can you confirm that the terms of this agreement were altered after it was signed?" Ajayi nodded, his voice firm. "Yes, the amendments were made without the knowledge of the plaintiff." Tunde's heart swelled with a mix of relief and determination. The jury was paying attention, their focus shifting toward him. When it was Bola's turn to cross-examine, he was relentless. His questions were designed to confuse, to poke holes in the testimony. But Tunde's witnesses held firm, their credibility intact. Bola's frustration began to show, though he masked it well. He leaned into his charm, trying to sway the jury with his confident demeanor. The trial's most dramatic moment came during Tunde's cross-examination of Bola's star witness, a financial analyst named Chukwuma. Bola had relied heavily on Chukwuma's testimony to argue that his client had acted within the bounds of the contract. Tunde approached the stand, his steps deliberate. "Mr. Chukwuma," he began, his voice calm, "you've testified that these financial discrepancies were due to clerical errors. Is that correct?" Chukwuma nodded. "Yes, that's correct." Tunde picked up a document from his table. "This is an internal email from your client, dated 2 weeks before the contract was signed. It specifically mentions plans to alter the profit-sharing terms. Would you still classify that as a clerical error?" Chukwuma hesitated, his eyes darting toward Bola, who was now visibly tense. I wasn't aware of that email," Chukwuma stammered. "Thank you, Mr. Chukwuma. No further questions." Tunde returned to his seat, his confidence bolstered by the ripple of murmurs that spread through the courtroom. The jury's eyes were now firmly on Tunde. He could feel the momentum shifting. During closing arguments, both sides pulled out all the stops. Bola's speech was passionate, almost theatrical. He painted his client as a misunderstood entity, appealing to the jury's emotions. But Tunde knew better. He didn't need theatrics. He needed the truth. He stood, his voice calm but firm. "Your Lordship, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is not just about my client. It's about setting a precedent. If we allow deceit and manipulation to go unpunished, what message are we sending to businesses across Nigeria?" He paused, letting his words sink in. "Justice is not just about punishment, it's about restoring balance. Today you have the power to restore that balance." As he sat down, he caught Bola's eye. For the first time, his former friend looked uncertain. The jury deliberated for hours, the tension in the courtroom palpable. Tunde paced the hallway outside, his mind racing. This trial wasn't just about winning. It was about proving that integrity and hard work could triumph over deceit. When the jury finally returned, everyone held their breath. The foreman stood, clearing his throat. "In the matter of Lawal Oil versus Zenith Ventures, we find in favor of the plaintiff." A wave of relief washed over Tunde. He closed his eyes, silently thanking God. His client shook his hand vigorously, gratitude etched across his face. Bola, on the other hand, sat frozen, his expression a mixture of shock and defeat. As Tunde stepped out of the courthouse, he was met with applause from reporters and onlookers. But for him, the victory was more personal than public. The high-profile case was over, but for Tunde, the journey was far from finished. Days after the trial, the energy of the courtroom still lingered in his mind. The victory was sweet, no doubt, but it also came with its scars. Back at the firm, the atmosphere had changed. Colleagues who once looked at him with skepticism now greeted him with respect. Tunde the Bulldog, they jokingly called him, referencing his tenacity in court. Even Mr. Ibrahim, the firm's senior partner, stopped by Tunde's office one afternoon.
"Tunde," he said, his voice carrying the weight of years in the legal world, "you handled yourself well. You reminded us all why integrity matters in this field." Tunde nodded, humbled by the recognition. But deep inside, he knew the experience had taught him more than just professional lessons. It had shaped him as a person. The firm's leadership, impressed by Tunde's performance, offered him a partnership track. It was everything he had worked for since his first day in law school. But instead of feeling elated, he felt conflicted. Tunde spent hours in his tiny apartment thinking about what he truly wanted. The law firm, with all its prestige, now felt like a place full of hidden agendas. Did he really want to spend the rest of his career navigating office politics and high-stakes battles? One evening, he met with his mentor, Mrs. Adebayo, at a quiet cafe in Wus. She listened as he poured out his thoughts, nodding thoughtfully. "Tunde," she said, "you've proven that you can fight for what's right. But you need to decide where your heart lies. Is it in this corporate jungle, or is there another way you can use your talents?" Her words stayed with him. A month later, Tunde made his decision. He left the firm, turning down the partnership track. Instead, he started his own practice, focusing on cases that aligned with his values, helping small businesses, representing underrepresented voices, and mentoring young lawyers who reminded him of himself. His first client was a struggling market trader, Mama Chinyere, whose stall had been unfairly seized by local authorities. It wasn't a high-profile case, and it certainly didn't make headlines. But as he stood in court defending her, he felt a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced in years. The experience with Bola and the trial had taught Tunde many things. Trust, he realized, should not be given lightly, but forgiveness was just as important. He didn't excuse Bola's actions, but he also didn't let bitterness take root in his heart. More importantly, Tunde learned to stay true to himself. Success, he discovered, wasn't about titles or accolades. It was about knowing that he had done the right thing, even when it was difficult. As he locked up his small, modest office one evening, the Abuja sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Tunde felt at peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, he was ready to face it on his own terms.
I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, please like the video, share it with your family and friends, comment on it, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and tap on the notification bell for more interesting stories like this one. Goodbye.